Welcome to another episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name's Mark Powell, and I have with me my special guest this morning, Jeof Falls, who's the General Manager of the Presbyterian Church of New South Wales. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Mark. It's
Now,
good
I
to be
can
here.
remember many years ago when I was just a young whippersnapper minister, new to the Assembly. The New South Wales Assembly had its share of financial problems, and the Chairman of Trustees, Mr. Jeof Falls, came to the podium. And I remember the whole assembly being somewhat in raptures about this suave, articulate, intelligent plan. So I feel like it's come full circle. I feel that it's very blessed to have you here today and to talk about where the church has gone in those last 20 years. Take us back to the early 2000s and where the Presbyterian Church was at and your role.
I remember it very well, Mark, as you remember it. I came into the trustees following that pro-renata meeting in about October, November 2000.
Yep.
So we're just coming up to the 20th anniversary. And I was not part of the assembly at the time. I was a member at Epping. Very happy elder, very happy member of that congregation. Had no real sense of what the assembly was. So for many young people that I speak to today, I find that they don't, like me, have a real sense of the assembly or how the church works. And so I had no knowledge of that. And then I received a phone call after the pro-renata meeting. So I can't speak about the meeting itself. And I had a phone call from a very good friend at Epping and said, look, Jeff, have you got some time on Saturday? This is on Wednesday afternoon. And Ian Robertson said, I said, sure, I've got some time on Saturday. What would you like to do? He said, I want you to come to Armidale with me, and because we've got a bit of a problem with our school up there. So I said, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'll get involved. So we hopped on a plane to Armidale, and I can say that within 2 hours of arriving in Armidale, I had a very deep appreciation of the massive financial problems that the church had really got itself into over several previous years. And then I then got involved with the review of Armidale, and then I got involved with the trustees. They didn't know who I was at all. And over a couple of months, from that sort of October, November, December, January, February, I got involved with having a look at what the problem was. And you'll remember at the time, the church was nearing insolvency. That's my personal view. Some would disagree with me. The former trustees would be very upset with me. But I was a former banker, so the way I got involved was I'd had about 15 years with Macquarie, 10 years with Macquarie Bank, Bank of America before then. So I was very experienced in finance, in banking, and I can say to you that from my short experience in looking at Armidale and then looking at the church was in a very serious financial state.
So what are the lessons, do you think, not attributing personal blame to anyone, but
No.
what are the lessons that we can learn as a denomination for risk management, for financial stewardship?
So when I got involved, it was clear there was no strong governance within the church, and over the years from 2001, 2, 3, 4. So just to lead into how I can answer that, we then ended up at the General Assembly in 2001 for the first time. So my first experience with the General Assembly, when you saw me, was in 2001. And I had no idea what this assembly was. I stood up in PLC Hall in their auditorium.
I remember it well.
And I told the assembly the truth. And I think that's the first thing I want to say, is that the structure of the church had been presented as being difficult. It was presented as complex. And I'll just simply say to you, it wasn't. And the critical thing about decision-making when confronted with problems, challenges, risks, is to simplify the complexity down to a couple of key points that you can then make a decision about in confidence under Christ. And I want to emphasise that. You'll see that throughout this conversation, I'm going to refer back to wisdom that you really read about in Proverbs, which is out of fear of the Lord,
Yeah.
all wisdom flows. It's not my wisdom. It's not your wisdom. It's wisdom that actually relies on God and Christ, and we are called as His servants to be able to be wise stewards. But that requires some tough decisions. And the first thing I observed was that we were far too soft. We had a sense of the issues and concerns, but it was made complicated. So it was ambiguous. It was grey. So for the first couple of years that I got involved, and I stepped into the chairman's role, as you know, after that 2001 General Assembly.
Yeah.
Having been a trustee for literally 2 meetings, so I'd gone from being appointed as a trustee in about the May to be the chair of trustees in July.
Wow.
And as you know, I've been the chair of trustees then right up to 5 years ago when I stepped down to apply for the general manager's role after Wayne Richards, our former general manager, retired. And I've had the privilege of being the general manager in the last 5 years. And so my involvement has been for 20 years.
Wow.
And I look back on how much has happened. But to answer your question, the first thing I observed was that there was unnecessary ambiguity and complexity to what should have been synthesised into some key areas that you could make decisions about. So as you remember, over about 3 or 4 years, and so it took time because we were talking about culture change and governance change. You'll remember that Peter Curry at the time led a committee to review the committees of the church. We sought to simplify the structure. We sought to simplify the complexity of the school's reporting. We brought to bear really corporate world governance standards over that time. And I remember a very, very lovely minister, now passed, who came up to me and said, Jeff, stop using the merchant banking language and use Christ's language. And so I was warned not to come into the church and bring the outside world in. And I learnt over a couple of years that I had to bring to bear the concepts of good governance, the concepts of how organisations actually make decisions where they're confronted with real risk, but in a way that was culturally acceptable to the ministers. And that's important. I think it is important for people to keep in mind that as part of the church, we are brothers and sisters in Christ. We need to bring to that relationship respect at all times. We need to see each other as equal. So this is a dialogue between you and me, irrespective of your role or my role. We bring to bear into this discussion unique gifts.
Yep.
And what we're doing, of course, is under Christ seeking to ensure that His church is here for the next 100 years. That our role is simply as His servants for this very, very, very short period of time, which is short in His time, feels long in our time, but He is simply using His people over time, over His time, for His purpose, for His good work. And we are part of that wonderful plan, and we should see ourselves as part of that wonderful plan. But we have responsibilities. So it's like there's an emerging discussion around social and environmental responsibilities in our world today. I think it's absolutely appropriate. But it goes to the heart of the question is, we have a responsibility as stewards of this world. We have responsibilities as stewards of His church. And we need to make some tough decisions from time to time. And if that means people have to leave, or we have to be gracious about restructuring, or we have to remove committees or reduce committees or sell a school or merge a school or look at our aged care facilities, which we're doing at the moment, you need to make those tough decisions, but in a godly way. And I think that's been certainly my goal for the last 20 years, and it's been a privilege.
Yeah, I must say that's the thing I think I've respected about you the most, is that you've been very pastoral in your relationships and yet very strong in your governance.
Yes.
And some people would say the iron fist and the velvet glove.
That's true.
But I think it aptly fits in this situation.
That's true. That's true.
There's so many things I want to talk to you about. One thing I just want to touch on is you were also chairman of trustees at the global financial crisis.
Yes.
Which affected not just our denomination,
Yes.
But lots of other denominations.
Yes.
What are the lessons that we can learn from there, do you think? Because we're still feeling the effects of it,
It's the same. So the approach that we took so that was in 2008. And when I became chairman in 2001, and we then appointed Wayne Richards as the general manager in the beginning of 2002, and we changed the structure. I will say that he, in his first report as the general manager to the trustees in 2002, he presented a report that said we can't afford to pay our staff in the general office. And so that's where we started. I was the new chair, trying to sort through the structure and the risks and the problems, peeling back this sense of ambiguity in what the church was. And he was confronted with the reality of paying his staff. So we resolved how we would do that. And what we then did is between 2002 and then 2008, what we brought to bear was a vision of building a church that was sustainable. And people get tired of me using this word, but I mean financially stable, risks stable in the sense of being able to make effective decisions for Christ over the long term.
Yeah.
And so we had we've had very intentional goals that we were seeking to achieve. In terms of the trustee investment fund, which is where you're going to, when I got involved and the church was near insolvent, we then had to position the church to be able to at least pay the bills. And so we took some hard decisions with some of the assets. We sold some assets. We liquidated some of the assets of the church. We brought to bear a pool of funds. And we had a vision of growing a sustainable trustee investment fund. And from about 2002 to 2008, we had a vision of growing a pool of resource to support that. Not knowing the global financial crisis was going to happen, but certainly knowing that the world is the world. And we as stewards have to prepare for the COVID situation. We have to be prepared to say, look, there may be a world catastrophe. How are we prepared for that?
See, I didn't know that. I didn't know that background. If you hadn't have been preparing like you had of, and the global financial crisis hit, where would we have been as there's no doubt, in a significantly worse situation. Some other churches had taken decisions that I would never have taken as a banker. They had taken decisions around forms of risk investment, which I would never have invested in as a banker, because I have a view about the sort of investments that churches should invest in for the long term. And we always, and this was a little bit of controversy on the assembly floor. You may remember that there were debates in 03, 04, 05 where people were challenging me about the trustee investment fund and how it was structured and whether it should be a unit trust structure and all sorts of things. And I just held, as you know, just quietly to the view. I appreciated everyone's view. I welcome everyone's opinion. I do take into account those opinions. And then we just quietly continue to build. So, your concerns are noted.
Yes. And so we had built this pool leading up to 2008. And so when the global financial crisis hit, which caused the whole of the world to drop the whole of the market in the world, global markets drop about 30%. We only lost around about 10 to 15%. And so we still lost, as you know. We've been working that out then over the last number of years in the sense of not so much working it out, simply seeking to rebuild and create that pool for the next crisis, whenever that comes.
And I must say, I think the situation with the schools is completely different. There's been
Absolutely.
a sea change and, literally, a tree change with Armidale. In fact, we've even started a new school when we merged, which you were part.
That's right.
You were very much at the centre of facilitating.
That's right.
Which is a great answer to prayer. If I can bring us up to the present, you're now general manager, and I feel like the general manager is like a juggler.
Yes.
You've got 8 balls in the air.
Yes.
Can you just, for those that might not be familiar, like you once were with the structure of the church, what do you as the general manager, what ministries of the church do you broadly oversee?
I oversee every one of the ministries in terms of the risks and the temporal elements of those ministries.
Right.
So this is a great question for young people. The work of the church, the work of the Presbyterian Church in New South Wales and the ACT is in effect directed, encouraged, supported, resourced by the General Assembly. And the first thing I'd say to any young person is go and sit in on a General Assembly. Because until you do that, you really don't have an appreciation of how the church works.
Yeah.
You know how your congregation works. You know that you're doing ministry work and pastoral work in your local congregation with your own minister. But what you're missing is, of course, the big picture. And it is important for every elder and young person, if they can, just come along and...
So give us a snapshot. What is the big picture? What are, like, so there's, you already mentioned Presbyterian Aged Care.
Yes. So
what are some of the other...
So there's 8 institutions. Okay. So 7 of those institutions are schools.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 7 schools. We have 4 independent schools, the Scots College, PLC Sydney, PLC Armidale, and we had the Scots School, but as you alluded to, 3 years ago, we had the opportunity of buying All Saints College from the Anglican Church. We took that opportunity and we merged All Saints College with the Scots School in Bathurst and created a brand new school, Scots All Saints College, which is performing extremely well. So we have 4 independent schools. We have 3 what were formed congregational Christian schools, so we call them low-fee Christian schools, one in Nambucca Valley, one in Casino, and one in Grafton. I chair only in the last 2 years, we've actually brought the 3 congregational schools together under one board, one governance structure, and I chair that board. So I watch over the congregational schools very closely as chair of that committee. And have been, as the chair of trustees and still as general manager, very much involved in the governance and the operations of the other 4 schools now. And so I have this excellent relationship, really excellent relationship with the principals, with the business managers. And it's fair to say that over the 20 years, in the first few years, people resisted giving us answers. But we just persevered. And the critical thing as the general office and as the general manager and on behalf of the trustees of the church that own all the assets, so the trustees own all the assets, we can come back to that in a moment, is that my role is to monitor what others are doing, not to interfere under the assembly. So the assembly's work is to provide education to 5,000 students across New South Wales through 7 schools. I'll come on to Presbyterian Aged Care in a minute. And there are 7 boards, 3 congregational schools are under one board now, but essentially a number of boards. And what my role is to ensure I know what they're doing. And I will say this, is that what then happens is the trustees are called to monitor that risk, and if they feel that something's going awry, is to take proactive action. And so we in New South Wales have a culture of what I call proactive engagement, which in the 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, for the first 10 years, was strongly resisted by the institutions. The trustees were not trusted, so we had to recover that sense of trust that people could rely on what we were doing and why we were doing it. So that involved a lot of communication, a lot of meetings, a lot of engagement, but never to back away from the responsibility, which is, look, the trustees own these assets for the church. The trustees are responsible for these institutions.
Yeah, if we could just drill down on that. A lot of people don't realise that, do they? That the assets of our local congregation do not belong to, for instance, Cornerstone Presbyterian Church of Strathfield.
No.
They belong to the trustees.
They belong to a property trust.
Yeah.
So that's a nice digression. Let me talk about that for a moment. That's important. And no one really knows this other than if you go to the General Assembly, and that is that, as you've said, what is the church? The church is essentially one property trust. We have around about 180 congregations. We have the 7 schools. We have a number of aged care facilities. We have Alloa Children's Hospital. Mm-hmm. And in every one of those 180 congregations, the Committee of Management runs a bank account. Every one of those dollars, every dollar of every asset, every dollar that's in every congregational bank account is actually owned by the property trust. And so then you say, well, how does that work? How does, what's the role of the local Committee of Management? Well, uniquely, the Committee of Management, and many don't realise this, derive their authority to deal with the money from the trustees, not from the General Assembly, but they're actually servants or delegated people who've been delegated authority by the trustees under the Property Trust Act, which was enacted in 1936, New South Wales Government Act, to actually deal with those assets. So what are the implications of that? Is that if the trustees see that a congregation is misusing its money, and this has happened over the 20 years, if there is a concern about fraud, which has happened over the 20 years, or mismanagement of those funds over the 20 years, the trustees themselves, simply by moving a motion, can remove the authority of the Committee of Management for their bank account. Simply by...
And that's happened?
That has happened. Now, sometimes we have presbyteries who ask us to do that. So the local presbytery, of course, knows there's one of its congregations is in trouble. And even in the last 5 years as general manager, I've had, 2 or 3 requests to actually, could you please take control, take control of this particular asset. And one of them is, in fact, Willoughby, which Cornerstone now looks after. Yeah. And so to be clear there, the presbytery invited us to really take back unto ourselves, the trustees, the management of Willoughby.
And to see the revitalisation of the work there.
Yeah. And then Cornerstone has come in to plant. And of course, the role of the trustees is then to assist Cornerstone to achieve that outcome in accordance with the Act.
Which, by the way, we were not just given; we had to apply amongst other proposals.
That's right.
But ours turned out to be successful.
That's correct. That's correct.
By God's grace, going well as
well.
Correct.
So, that's exactly right.
I've got to ask. We talk so much about young people listening to this and learning about the governance of the church, but there'd be a lot of older people, I could imagine, in your similar situation in life, where they've had a lot of experience in banking. What sort of encouragement would you give to those people that are experienced professionals to be serving the church in the temporal affairs? Any guidance or advice?
I just ask them to, if anyone's listening to this who feels called to serve and haven't actually served on a committee, or the trustees, which is a committee in its own right, to actually approach their minister and say, look, I'm interested, I have gifts, I'd like to serve in some way. The reason I say that very strongly is that we have a lot of challenges finding gifted men and women to serve on our committees. And there's a social influence here. Over the last 2 decades, there's been a fall in volunteerism across all NGOs. And it's very real, and certainly it's as real for a church or a faith-based organisation as a not-for-profit charity.
Mm-hmm.
So we're living in a world where there's, I had someone say to me yesterday, there's an increasing sense of individualism, which reduces the sense of community, that we're all here to support one another. We should be part of a community for the common good of that community. Mm-hmm. And in the last couple of decades, there's certainly increasing isolation, which has been reinforced by COVID, by the way. So we're seeing that as a major problem, and that's been evolving for some time.
Yep.
So the challenge is we're finding it challenging to find gifted men and women to serve on our committees. Mm-hmm. So it is important that people do contribute, particularly if they've got those gifts. And the fact that they don't know how the assembly works shouldn't stop them by saying, as a result of seeing this video, is to say, look, I'm actually interested with what Jeff has said. Talk to your local minister, talk to you, and talk to me, and say, look, how can I help? And I can assure you that we are looking for great people to help. Yeah. So that's important. That's what I'd be saying. I also find that for many older people, they have a mindset which is caught up in a charitable mindset, or that they're in a corporate mindset.
Yeah.
I will say this: the church is not a corporate, and the church is not it's structured as a charity, but it's not an NGO. And what I mean by that is, we are here for Christ at the centre of what we're doing. And I just keep repeating that. And you are a servant of Christ, as I am a servant of Christ. I just happen to have slightly different gifts.
Yeah.
And one of my favourite passages is 1 Corinthians 12, which I repeat all the time. And that is that, and this is why I love the Presbyterian governance structure, by the way, which I'll lead into, is that under 1 Corinthians 12, Christ is the head of a body, and each of us are parts of that body.
And the hand can't say to the leg, "I don't need you."
And the toe is no less important than the heart. And it's a beautiful passage which says it doesn't matter which part you play, frankly. And indeed, the whole body can't work without your part. Yeah. And so, exactly, and we are called to actually come together, see ourselves as part of a united body, and to be able to serve him. Now, that's at the heart of our faith, and therefore anyone who feels called needs to know that that's at the heart of what they're called to do, reflected in the ministry that they're doing, irrespective of that particular ministry. And so it is important that people see themselves within that construct. If they do, then it doesn't take too much then to bring to bear those gifts as part of that. Now, I'll talk about the governance structure. So the Presbyterian Church, as you know, is what I call the devolved governance structure. What do I mean by that? It means that the question here is, how do you make decisions? How do we make decisions as a church? We're not a centralised church. Yeah. We don't have hierarchy.
Or bishops.
Yeah. And let me tell you, if I say to anyone, I'm the boss, which I'm not, Mark, I'm not the boss, is that I'm simply a servant, no different to you. Yeah. And the lovely thing about the Presbyterian polity is that all decisions are by committee. All decisions are by committee. Now, the challenge with that is, and if you think about it, the assembly is simply a committee. The presbyteries are simply committees. The session is a committee. The committee management is a committee. And all the church boards, you could sit on the board of the Scots College. It is simply a committee.
Yeah, we're very much a republic, aren't we? A spiritual republic.
That's under Christ, under one head. Yeah. That's absolutely true. The challenge we have under committees is it's really hard to make decisions. So anyone who works in a committee knows the utter frustration of making a decision. But after I left merchant banking in my mid-30s, I was consulting for 20 years. Yeah. I did a lot of employee research, culture research, and I was working with a lot of CEOs, a lot of senior leadership teams. And a lot of the consulting work I was doing, it was around governance, around decision making. And there's multiple forms of governance structures. I will say that even from my professional experience, decision making by committee, whilst extremely difficult to make work, if you can make it work well, is always more sustainable in the longer term. And what I mean by that is, an individual like me might say, I think we should do such and such with one of our schools, but I'm only just one individual. And the unique thing about our committees, when you think about 1 Corinthians, is that generally our committees are mainly 12 people, men and women. And what we're doing is bringing the diversity of gifts of 12 into the decision process. So it's not just me. It's my view is one of 12. And whilst it's hard to get everyone to sometimes agree, and we use our majority vote quite regularly, and that's acceptable, is that I have no doubt that if you have particularly men and women coming together into a committee with a unique range of gifts and perspectives to be brought to bear on a particular question, in respect of which a decision has to be made, the ultimate decision that's made will generally hold for a longer period of time than just the whims of one individual. And so when you're thinking about the governance of a church, which we're here for all time, so it's unique, utterly unique. We're not, as a church, interested in some concept of return on equity or shareholders' funds. We are here to be stewards of his assets for the long term. So we're called to actually ensure that the assets we're leaving, the institutions, the ministries we're leaving, allow others to pick up and continue to develop and serve. And so you do that through the committee structure.
Yeah, and look, it's a really, really important and foundational point. The 2 biggest issues it seems that we're facing today are COVID and childhood institutional sexualised abuse. And I know that you've been overseeing both of them. Do you want to touch on those?
So I, again, the first thing I did as the general manager when COVID hit back in March was to go to the moderator, the then moderator, Richard Keith, and say, really, we need a committee. We need to, it's important that we bring a key group of people together here. And we formed a moderators COVID task force. And what we did is bring to bear representatives from every one of the committees. And so we've got about 12 or 13, 14 people come together. And that took a couple of weeks to sort out as to who should be on that committee. What's the purpose of that committee? It's one of communication. It's one of decisions. So it's taking, it's understanding what New South Wales Health has been,
which has been very
required.
Good, by the way, I must say.
Thank you. We realise that in times of crisis, you have to over-communicate. So, and there has to be, crucially, a single source of truth in that process. So the committee very quickly resolved that there would only be one single source of truth. And that's in the form of the updates we send out. It then meant we had to get all our database together. So for the first time, the Presbyterian Church has a single database, which is actually stable, of contacts. We have over 700 emails now in that contact list. And what we've found in the last couple of months is that by just simply sending out emails, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice a week, more recently only once in the last few weeks, and I'm about to do another one that will come out in the next couple of days, is that what we're doing is giving people confidence to know what the expectations of New South Wales Health are, and then to try and help them frame their decisions within their unique context. So we get 1 or 2 or 3 emails every day from congregations across New South Wales with unique circumstances from every regional, rural, remote community where they've never seen this infection, but they're genuinely trying to follow New South Wales health guidelines. They're genuinely concerned for the health of their people. And I will say this, it was under the Presbyterian Church devolved structure. The great thing is ministers like to be independent, and our system allows ministers to be independent as part of a common good. Now, the wonderful thing about that is in a COVID, everyone adapts extremely quickly. They don't wait. You don't wait for me or some centre or some archbishop to tell you what to do. You just get on and do it.
The interesting thing is I've noticed churches have been incredibly compliant.
Incredibly.
And I think have really bent over backwards to follow regulations.
Without a doubt.
Is there a danger of overdoing that?
It's a
controversial opinion.
That is a controversial opinion, and I expect that opinion to become more controversial in the coming months, particularly when the infection rate stays down.
Yeah.
And people start to challenge that authority. Mm-hmm. So this is about authority now. So what you're moving into a realm of discussion
maybe authoritarianism, Jeff. There's a sense of where we've given up our freedoms.
But for what purpose? So let me answer your question, because I'm asked this increasingly.
Yeah, I'm playing the Dorothy Dixie.
Yeah, I know, Mark. It's true. Why are we being asked? And the reason is, and why the vast majority of our people want us to maintain that discipline, is because the reason is for the health of your people. So this is not a discussion around theology or rules or something in a sense that's important but esoteric. This is about, is my mother or father, who's elderly, going to get sick and in the early stages of this COVID, more than likely to die?
Okay, so let me present the question to you that there'd be, I think, many listening to this, or at least some, who would want to ask. So I'll ask it on their behalf, okay? There's a great risk to the elderly. The risk when we go younger in age is less and less and less and less. So if you're under 50, the risk is minimal, less than 1%.
Yeah. Should
we not be reflecting our policies to protect the vulnerable, i.e. our elderly and those that have comorbidity questions? Are we draining the lake to catch the fish, so to speak? Are we limiting all of our freedoms to protect a minority? Should it be inverted, perhaps? Your response?
I simply ask you to ask your mother, if she's alive, and might be 85. Are you saying to your mother, I'm prepared to trade off the risk of your life for the sake of my grandchildren? And that becomes an extremely personal, and it becomes very personal. So the difficulty with the question is that if you take a view that it's okay to drop the restrictions, and global leaders are confronting this. So there's multiple examples of this around the world where leaders are saying, for the sake of our economy, our young people who need to go to work, we're going to drop the restrictions. And immediately, we know the death rate goes up immediately because this is a highly infectious disease. And you're right, it's mainly affecting old people. And at the moment, there's no vaccine. So at the moment, if you get it, there is a high risk, if you're an older person, that you will die. So it then becomes a question, well, do you drop the restrictions knowing the death rate's going to go up? I will simply say that's a very deep question to ask. But I think our position in New South Wales, and I'll say this because I'm part of a forum of representatives from all faiths in New South Wales, the New South Wales Health has pulled together. Outstanding. I will just simply say it's an outstanding process that New South Wales Health and New South Wales government put into place. And they did this right at the beginning. And there's about 80 or 90, more than 80 or 90 representatives. So every faith in New South Wales is represented. And they all ask the same question that you've just asked. And they're all unhappy about not singing, and they're all unhappy about not chanting, and they're all unhappy about not coming together in a church or an institution, a faith-based institution. But at the end of the day, New South Wales Health keeps saying, we're here to protect all people. The answer is we're here to protect everyone, and we will seek to do that.
I think what some people are finding very difficult is the inconsistency.
Of course.
I think churches have the vast majority. I can't think of a church that hasn't complied with all the regulations. In fact, if anything, I've seen them over-comply.
Sure.
And be even more restrictive for the sake of out of love,
Yes.
for brothers and sisters and visitors. But I guess it's just really this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and
It is.
and it's going to be a trickier one, I think, as we go forward, particularly as we consider the compulsion behind vaccines. And
It's true. But I will say, I'll just, I guess, finish this little part of this discussion by simply affirming the number of emails I get of thanks from older people from our congregations who say,
that's helpful to know.
yeah, Jeff, look, I'm thrilled that you're keeping us informed. Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying to me. And I will say to you, even in the last month or two where infection rates have gone down, no one has emailed me and said we should be lifting these restrictions. We get the odd discussion that's coming from one or two ministers around authority and this question that you raised. I'm not getting any of that from our congregations. I will say that what we are getting is increasing questioning about what do we mean by a gathering. So the focus is, as you know, at the moment, at this instant in time, if you're in a church building or premises, the number is 100, 4 square metre rule. If you're in a public place, a gathering, it's 20. So there's an inconsistency there. And so the question is, of course, if I've got a youth group that's in the local park, do I go from 100? If that youth group was in a church, you could have up to 100. We've said that. If you move that youth group out into the local park, it's 20, and that's true. And so we're getting increasing questions about, as people start to move out of their building, how do the rules apply? And this is where there's going to be, there is inconsistencies, and even in visiting homes, as you know, the rule is still 20, but New South Wales Health has said strongly recommend no more than 10. Well, what have I said? I've said 20. The rule says 20.
Okay.
You know, it's so we're being. It's up to the householder.
And obviously, if people want to email you about this,
Yes, of
talk
course.
to you about this, the
Please do.
door is
They will
always
do.
open.
Sure.
One final question, and this is a lighter, more personal one. You're sitting on so many boards. Do you ever see your wife?
Yes, I see Jen.
Yeah.
Look,
What's her name again?
Yeah, no. Look, I sit, but that's the role.
Yeah.
And I love it. And Jen knows I love it. And my children know I love it. And
and I want to touch on that because you have a son who is a Presbyterian minister in the church.
about to be.
About to be
ordained.
About to be ordained. About to go to Tulua.
Vanuatu. Yes, correct.
Vanuatu to serve.
That's correct.
You must be very proud of him.
I am.
I'm thankful to God, I should say.
I'm thankful to God, as I am for all my 4 children.
Yes.
as
No
a
favourites,
father,
no favourites.
Not at all. And I will say that I have two girls and 2 boys. My eldest daughter is at Chatswood serving. In fact, we have 4 generations of women at Chatswood.
Yep.
So,
Great.
and my 2 sons are very strong, deeply committed Christians. Rob has been called into ministry, and we do give thanks to God for that. And it's a time of joy.
It's wonderful. Well, look, thank you very much for being with us. I really appreciate all your insights and your involvement in the church. And it's a really great reminder too that if you're interested in serving in the Presbyterian Church, if you have gifts in the temporal area, if you're like Jeff and you have experience in either finance or banking, it'd be great to be able to have your service in the wider church. Well, this has been another episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. I hope you can join us next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark.